Right now, I will move forward with our next conversation that we're having, and this one is going to be particularly interesting as well. It's going to try and tackle the question, does the European Union have a digital infrastructure required for truly cross-border financial services? And it is my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce to you Country Manager for Europe and General Manager of Flutterwave Lithuania, Linas Beliūnas.
I'm saying hi to everyone that has joined, also to those that were with us from the beginning. I already see the panel, so without further ado, let me introduce you all to the fellow panelists. So here we have Liudas Kanapienis, co-founder and CEO of Ondato. Hey, Liudas.
Hi, everyone.
We also have Mr. Tomas Karpavičius, Head of Market Infrastructure Policy Division at Bank of Lithuania. Hey, Tomas.
Hi.
Oh, hey. We also have Paul Randall, Executive Director for Global Market at Creditinfo Group. Hey, Paul.
Yeah, I can hear.
Hello, everybody.
Hey. And finally, Jóhannes Kolbeinsson, CEO of PAYSTRA. Hey.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you.
So, without further ado, let us go straight into some of the questions that hopefully will get some ideas here and there. So, the first thing that I would like to start off with is that digital infrastructure is obviously one of the building blocks for cross-border financial services. And I'm very keen to know what is your view. So, how do you define a truly cross-border financial services? Maybe, Liudas, you would like to kick this off as you were on different sides of a financial services pie. What would be your take on this?
Hi, everyone, once again. So thank you, Linas, for this question. So basically, the infrastructure at this moment is actually, it reminds me this conference. Yeah. So theoretically, everything should work and it looks good, but we see some issues and some delays and some technical difficulties. Yeah, so from general perspective, all the infrastructure and legal framework is enabling cross-border business, passporting and everything, and organizing the business and serving the clients in whole European Union. But when digging deeper to every country, and as we have different currencies, different regulators, local regulators, we see that in some countries the real cross-border is not working as it should be, because everyone understands that in one single market, starting the financial service, everyone is looking at the whole market itself, and once with a single launch in any country, either it's Lithuania, UK, or Germany, to launch their services to the whole market and to serve all the clients. And still, this we see that this is not work as intended.
Okay. Yeah. By the way, before touching upon other panelists, I would like to make a note that every one of you guys who are listening this online through the app of the conference, you can share your comments and questions, and those that are most interesting and most relevant will definitely be raised. So thank you, Liudas. I'm also very keen to know the perspectives from the regulator, and we have Tomas here from Bank of Lithuania. So I'm very keen to hear your take. What would be your views in this domain?
Well, thank you, Linas. I have quite a view on both sides, not just from service providers' perspective. In theory, is possible to provide services, but on the other side, are customers, potential customers, ready to use services cross-border? Do we understand what we are doing and how we can do this? I think we should put more emphasis on education in this respect, and information spread for businesses and individuals. And in that respect, I think this is a missing part from in the whole picture when we speak about some promotion of digitalization. So I will be brief here.
Okay, thank you. Guys, those that weren't touched upon, do you have anything to add for this question?
It's on a truly cross-border financial service, quite an interesting definition. I'm not sure if I have it right, but for the consumer, this should mean that he would be able to use financial services from wherever he is in the EU without feeling the difference. Partly this is already the case in some parts of the industry, but for the provider, this is to be able to provide this frictionless service across border. There are, well, technically I was going to say we probably are very close to it, but there is still some friction to be worked on. But on the regulatory requirements side, it's probably more complicated. Only the thing that distant service providing itself, it's more riskier than local service. Distant collateral can be complicated, and in the end, the consumer will have to be subject to the jurisdiction of the service providers, and there may be considerable differences in law and regulations between countries and court practices. So if we are, for example, here in Lithuania servicing a company in Spain, the Spanish company will have to adhere to the jurisdiction of Lithuania in the agreement. And there are some complications that it's a challenge that needs to be worked on to get to this truly cross-border services.
Thank you.
I think to add to that, I think at this time, perhaps the focus should be on some key industries to really make it smooth. I think and particularly from a credit and lending perspective, you need two aspects. You need consistent access to data, and you need a consistent regulatory framework. And we saw recently with the GDPR, when we're looking at business information data, if we look at the shareholders and the management, in one country, in Poland, there was a very different interpretation to the use of that information compared to other countries. And without that consistency, it creates business risks and really will put off lenders. And particularly if we're looking at SME lending post-COVID, it's going to be a key area of the business. So perhaps focus on certain areas will really support the growth post-crisis.
Yeah, some very good points were outlined, and I would like to then get to the next question, which is quite interrelated to this one. So I'm keen to know your views on the payment infrastructure. What do you think? Is it ready and accessible to foster innovation and competition, more importantly, in the cross-border payment services? Maybe we could begin from you.
Well, I can talk towards the card payment infrastructure, which I know quite a bit. And the largest part of the European card payment infrastructure is owned and controlled by private US companies. This is to mean that they set the rules, they decide who participates and who not. This is private companies with profit goals. So even though they want to participate in innovation and competition is not there to their favor or to their benefits. So competition may effectively be hindered in the card payment industry in Europe by private companies. I think this is something that, the authorities, they have been given the power in the PSD2 to take over this control. And I think it's actually time that they do it, that they take over control in this. Because now we are depending on some officers in offices in San Francisco to decide how the rules should be in the card payment industry in Europe. So that's my...
Thank you.
I can give an input on the money transfers if you would like, Linas. In Lithuania, actually, we have a really good and unique situation for the money remittance itself, and a really good platform for the innovation. As now there is a possibility for any financial institution, that means that not being a bank or credit union, but also the electronic money institutions and payment institutions, to connect to SEPA transfers directly, which means that they can serve the European market as a whole, and to make the transfers in euros, because that was really a big, let's say, issue when creating a financial institution, because I was doing that myself before. But of course, when again we are talking about the European market, we do understand that we have different currencies in the market, and there's still quite a few challenges and quite a few issues in other currencies than euros for the financial institutions to operate. But anyway, in Lithuania we have a bit better situation than in some of other countries, because in other countries this infrastructure is fully dependent on the commercial banks. That means that we have more or less the same situation as with the card business and card acquiring and issuing business.
Yeah. Thank you, Liudas.
May I step
Please.
in here? Yeah, because we're really working with these issues like infrastructure on payments, and SEPA is, I would call it a success. If we call it an ordinary SEPA, you can pay with the same payment anywhere with a SEPA area. It's more than just Euro area, but full reachability. But here we have SEPA Instant coming, and still a lot of things to do here, because SEPA Instant reachability is not here. And I think this trend should be followed in coming years to develop a really European infrastructure in this respect, given that other European countries with other currencies also have available instant payments infrastructure or in the process of building it. We have a good opportunity in Europe to have instant payment infrastructure and build other products on that infrastructure, in particular in retail payments at the point of sale. And this is declared and investigated by the European stakeholders. On the other side, I hear this issue of getting access to infrastructure. It's not just payment infrastructure, I would call, but also infrastructure that surrounds payments infrastructure and facilitates the operation of it. Taking even front-end solutions like mobile devices and card readers and so on. Everything is on the table to look closely how to regulate and to find the right balance to let access for market players and to manage risks that they could bring when accessing the infrastructure. So I think this point is very important in this respect, and we should work carefully and devote our attention to this issue.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to this, or shall we move to another question?
Should we move on?
Cool. Okay, guys. So another thing which is especially interesting and probably very much related from the regulatory perspective is when it comes to the EU infrastructure and requirements. Could you define any or a couple of those that could be digitized but are not yet digitized, and why do you think this is important?
So I think there's a strong desire to and lots of innovation to innovate and move forward. And I think while everyone's been sat at home, one of the fantastic things I think is everybody has really re-looked at their business models, looked at how to make things more efficient, how things can be digitalized, because effectively, now as an example, we've all been living in a digitalized world for the last 3 months. And I think we really start seeing some of the areas where work has to be done from a legislative point of view to get greater consistency. So we can have we know when we're moving from one market to another, we've got consistency in terms of the access to various data sources, the way that data source can be used under certain consent, the way that the legal requirements, let's say for the Consumer Credit Directive, is interpreted in each country. So the broader processes can be consistent, which are really key for efficiencies for a digitalized lender, rather than having to restart the process each time you go to a new market with different laws. I think particularly on the consumer side, a lot of the interpretation is down to, I guess, from a political perspective, in terms of whether people have a strong feeling against internet lending, as an example. And so with the broadness of the directives, it leaves so much openness. So I think a little bit more specific approach can lead to a greater uniformity and can really open up the potential for true cross-border lending.
Yeah. Also, I would like to ask Liudas, since he is working on digitizing one part of the, let's call it, consumer journey, what do you think is still missing, and how far you are within your quest of, let's say, digitization?
Yeah, Linas, I'm sorry, I heard you really bad, but I hope that I heard the question. So as mentioned in the very beginning, yeah. So basically, technically, and from the regulation perspective, if talking about the European Union, we have the let's say common framework of how these services can be served remotely and cross-border, and it's actually now in place in every country. Yeah, but there's always an issue as we are talking about different countries, and implementation of that framework differs in the different countries. And that would be actually not an issue, because technologically it's not a problem to solve different, let's say, regulatory requirements in all the countries, and to serve the clients across European Union. But then we come to the point that was mentioned by Tomas and Jóhannes as well, that from users' perspective, from the end client's perspective, it looks different, yeah, because the user experience in all these different countries then become different because of the requirements. And when we are talking with the implementation of solutions for global companies, I mean that operating in different countries, then we come to some requirements that has to fit every kind of country's requirements. And if they want to have more or less common solution for all the countries that they serve, they're coming to the most strict requirement, that from the countries they're operating. And then it actually comes to the issue that they are not looking so competitive from the perspective of the user because of the let's say implementations and the compliance procedures that they have in place, comparing to some local players. And actually, we had this situation, a really, expressed one, let's say with the Cyprus. Yeah, so because the requirements of user boarding and everything was really, really different comparing to other European countries. And then coming for any kind of player coming to that country becomes a kind of a challenge. So there's one part of the, let's say, with the compliance and the regulation part. The other part is actually the readiness of the infrastructure and availability of some kind of data that is required, let's say, from the financial institution, especially when we come to fraud checks and availability to check the data. And then we come to really different situations in the countries where we have examples with the open APIs and open data possibilities and really closed databases that actually nobody can access that, even the local financial institutions. And that's, again, is of course, a challenge for financial institutions serving the clients across the border and especially remotely. So that's my look at this situation.
Thank you, Liudas.
Well, I think there's, with regards to how the EU infrastructure formality requirements can be more digitalized, there are actually quite a few. There's much too much paperwork and there's a lot of bureaucracy. Just one example is notarization and apostillization requirements. This is just old ways and this is obsolete. It's impossible to do this in a digital economy. Recently I had to go to one governmental office. I had to pick up a paper. I had to walk with this paper to a notary office to have this paper stamped so that it's certain that I picked up this paper at the governmental office and that is correct. Then I had to take the same paper and I had to walk with it to another office and I had to get it apostilled so that to verify that the notarization was correct. So, this is almost ridiculous. We should find new ways. We can't do better than this. This is costing all kinds of time and fees. And there are actually quite a few areas where this can be improved, well, considerably.
Okay. Before we move to the next question, I would like to check. Can you
add one last point?
Yeah, please.
I think one of the other aspects is sometimes the conflict between different regulation. So one of the most obvious ones is between GDPR and, for instance, some use of data such as credit bureau laws. And there the central bank will be giving advice in one direction, and data protection in a different direction, and about in general about the use of data. And I think this is another aspect where if we could find some form of arbitration between different legal aspects before having to take things to court or really escalating them, this would also give us a clearer view for use of digital data.
Okay. Before we move to the next question, I'd just like to check one more time. Tomas, maybe you can hear me now? Any better?
Not very clearly, sorry. I can hear, but still, at least I hear that you asking me something.
Okay. Yeah, that's a shame. But either way, as Liudas kicked this off, technical difficulties are still part of this. So it's a rather related thing that we just discussed. So do you think, and it's a very quick question to wrap this before going to the next, do you think that we can have at any point in time EU as a single country, not only monetary union, which it still isn't, and probably never will be, either from regulatory perspective and then truly cross-border financial services. Is it possible? What do you think, guys? Very quick take from each of you.
Sorry, I can kick it off. I'm not sure if everyone heard the question. So the question is if it's possible to have the European Union as a really single market. Yeah. And I think it's really possible actually, and we see a really good examples on let's say PSD2 directive, and of course, although with some issues and some guys involved in that can comment on that. Especially when we have different working groups and let's say different API descriptions, but I will not go dig deeper in that. But I'm sure that we really can have European Union as a single market with a single legal and framework and compliance requirements.
Well, if I may, from a regulatory perspective, yeah, it's our task, it's our job to harmonize to the most possible extent approach and regulation and every practices that we employ for when provide some services and employ some regulatory instruments. So I think that is possible, though. A long way to go, a long way to a lot of things to do to reach this task, and I think it's not just a sprint we can run. It's a long marathon, and we need patience to do this thing.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, perhaps I would also agree. I think there is a way forward, and as a British person, I think I'll be envious of the steps going forward of the harmonisation. And I think, but in the meantime, perhaps there is an opportunity for fintech facilitators to make it easy to find ways to make it easy for lenders, for financial services in general, to find ways to navigate the differences in each country by providing services. So in the short term, there's an opportunity, and hopefully in the long term, we'll see more and more harmonization.
Maybe I can add a little bit to this. I agree that this is a goal that we should have, and we should move towards it. Of course, on the business side, we don't have much patience, so we want to have it already tomorrow. But it is moving. We are moving into the correct direction. It is getting better. The regulations are increasing competition and innovation. So we're on the right path, but there is quite a way ahead of us. But let's do it fast.
Good. So I like the positivity here. So let us now move to another rather big question, which I'm very interested to hear your views on. So does the EU have the infrastructure and capabilities to compete on a large scale with the tech giants coming from US and China? If not, what should be done?
Should I start with this?
Please.
So whether the EU has the infrastructure and capabilities to compete on a large scale with techs from US and China. So, well, the EU may not have the infrastructure yet, but it has the capabilities. And it just has to decide what infrastructure to use, whether to enter into an existing infrastructure or whether to create a new one. It will be quite interesting to follow the new Pepsi payment, what's it standing for? Which is a new payment, European-wide payment system, which is supposed to compete among else with the large US payment systems. It's also really interesting to see how China is reinventing payments. They're just completely ignoring whatever is before, and they're just going with new technology. and not trying to imitate or enter into some legacy systems, but rather to rethink things. And similarly, the EU can create new competitive infrastructure. We can use digital technology, making use of cameras and electronic IDs and digital signatures and so on, rather than to try to step in what has been done before. So definitely there's capability and there's opportunities, and yeah.
Thank you.
I think one of the challenges is from those giants that have already managed to use the scale that they have in those markets to then get to a significant scale to then come to Europe with already strong infrastructure. I think some of the challenges are that perhaps we can certainly compete. We heard about the sandbox in Lithuania earlier in developing new businesses, but the potential for them to scale quickly is restricted with some of the barriers that we've talked about. And perhaps until that is taken away, it's going to be difficult for them to then expand elsewhere with already a momentum of scale that can go elsewhere. So I think there has to be some way to go before we can really feel we can challenge. On the other hand, perhaps some of the challenges we've talked about in terms are underestimated by some of the American Chinese in terms of understanding some of the challenges within Europe, which gives certainly the local entities some strength to win the competitive battles in Europe.
Thank you. Tomas, maybe you could share your views on this, or Liudas.
So it's always you see a question if we're looking at the competition at what level. Yeah. So if we are looking at the competition at like European Union level, of course we're capable to do that, and it's we have everything in place. We have the infrastructure there. We can create a new one. It's not a question about that, but it's always a question about what we want to achieve from that competition. And if we are looking at the China example, that was a really good example how they're looking at all the infrastructure and how they are just creating a new one without paying attention what was already created, and how they are implementing their solutions. That was done just, we all understand, because there was no previous infrastructure, and because users and the consumers were not used to some kind of instruments. And in Europe, we have the really different situation, because infrastructure that was always there, that was always implemented, and we're adopting new ways, new technologies, and new possibilities, and user and consumer behavior needs, let's say, to the existing technologies. But we really can compete in actually all the levels. I mean, we have really good examples from Europe, like Revolut, N26 and others that are going to the global scale from European Union, and actually acquiring lots of customers and showing how this business can impact actually the whole infrastructure and whole ecosystem. So we really already do have really good examples.
Thank you, Liudas. So I guess we could wrap this up. So thank you, everyone, for your views. Thank you, everyone, for those who have joined and listened to the panel. Apologies for the challenges that we had. these are similar as we have on the actual business life. So I hope you enjoy this. Thank you once again, my lovely panelists, for tuning in, and I see you soon.